Hi, and welcome to episode 2 of Up and Coming Soon. Who do we have today, Andy?
Today we have John Frisbie, and he is making a documentary which is called Anytime Baby, The War for the Lower East Side. And it's basically a story, or it covers the story of the battle between the squatters and Giuliani's new NYPD during the 90s for these squat areas in the Lower East Side. Mm-hmm. You can find this. He's got a Kickstarter out for it right now. You can use the search term anytime, baby. And you'll be able to find that, and we'll also have a link on the actual podcast page, so you can just press and link straight to the Kickstarter.
And you'll find that podcast page on www.pedestrians.net. We release weekly content. We release a weekly filmcast, a weekly gamecast. We have special interviews every now and again. We have a YouTube page, Twitter @Pedestrians, Facebook /Pedestrians. I think that sums everything up.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll just go straight into the interview. To start off with, do you want to just kind of go into how did you get involved in this whole subject, and kind of what was it that made you decide to make this documentary?
Sure. I'm a gaffer, which is a lighting technician.
Yeah.
I work in film and television. I was shooting at the Cheyenne Diner, which is an old New York diner on the west side.
Okay.
We were shooting a French film called A New York Thing, and they were in the process of dismantling it and taking it apart piece by piece to be shipped off and rebuilt as a tourist attraction in the South.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting perspective to have something where you're shooting turning into a movie prop.
Yeah.
That was a real thing. It was my old neighborhood, and I used to eat there. But inside it was like greasy, crowded, and being destroyed. So I went outside and I started talking to the generator operator. Mm. And his name was Rick Kleeman, and I started talking about this neighborhood, my old neighborhood, and how it had changed. There was Blockbusters and Starbucks and McDonald's that would have been set on fire in the 90s when I was living there in an illegally converted garment factory.
Yeah.
And then he started telling me about his place, and turned out it was one of the squats on the Lower East Side. And the more he talked about it, the more I started to recall some pieces of this story.
Okay.
It was on the cover of the New York Times. It was in the local news. But essentially, it was a huge riot between 5 buildings on East 13th Street and Giuliani's newly revamped NYPD under our now reinstated police chief, Bill Bratton.
Okay.
And so I was fascinated by the story. First of all, that I had forgotten it. I'm a New Yorker. I love New York history.
Yeah.
And here he was reminding me of this just amazing piece of our history. And then the more he talked, the more he started to reveal that at the time he was an amateur filmmaker, and that he had recorded all this stuff, but because of the stress of being a so-called squatter for that long, he had never revisited it. He had never viewed this video, and he had hours and hours of it. And he offered to show it to me, and I was like, "Heck yeah, I'll look at it."
I definitely want to see this stuff.
Yeah.
So I was literally going to ask the same thing. Then this stuff all still exists, and then I guess that's sort of the kindling for the whole project. I suppose that's how it kind of starts from there.
Absolutely. It started with kind of just the discovery that this footage was there.
Absolutely.
And an untold or seemingly disappearing subject.
And also something that I guess it's weird, like you said then, like, you know, as a native from there, you know, it's a piece of history that happened almost right under everyone's noses. Yet it's completely started to fade from the consciousness. You know, I mean, it's a really weird thing to happen, but it happens all over.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point. There used to be an old television show, and it was, you know, the city has a million stories. Here's one of them, and that is the problem is even in the 90s, before the internet really came alive, that we were in a constant news cycle of our own. The New York Times had to publish daily, and so these stories get swept under the mental rug.
Yeah, just slowly fade into insignificance.
That's,
right.
When it comes to the title of the film, Anytime Baby, where does that come from?
That is the name of the tank that the NYPD used in the siege on 13th Street.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and so, like, I don't know if you guys have kept up with any of what went down in Ferguson, but in the reassessment of what went down in Ferguson, there has been a lot of stories about how the Iraq and Afghanistan, as they start to wind down, there's all this surplus military goods.
Yeah.
And so these vehicles are starting to be used everywhere in small town America, on campuses, etc. But that began with the Vietnam War. And so post-Vietnam, late 70s, all the materials started to show up particularly in big cities, where we'd had riots in the 60s and 70s. And so the NYPD started using armored personnel carriers and tanks that had been converted into battering rams, and they used them against the people, the homesteaders on East 13th Street and 95. And the name that they plastered on was, Anytime Baby.
It's a really, I find it really not. I don't want to say weird, but it's sort of quite scary in a way when you think not just that this stuff gets used by police forces essentially against people, like civilians or sort of citizens of the US, but that somebody of power somewhere didn't stop to think what message this might send to people as well.
I know, right?
That's the thing you sort of think.
Yeah,
it's kind of like
bring it on.
Yeah, it's like it's a twofold like screw up really, where you think like. What you're actually doing is pretty bad in of itself, but the fact that you completely failed to notice that you're using military grade material against civilians, it's sort of it's scary. You'd like to think that it's just an oversight, but there's that part of you thinks, oh, maybe it probably isn't,
Yeah.
Right. And I got, first of all, you're absolutely correct, but it's like it's the poorest of our citizens. It's the least able to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These people are struggling. They're struggling so much they can't even afford a home. And so they go into this abandoned, decrepit, the oldest stock we have. And it's then this attitude of let's draw a line in the sand and point to the line in the sand and saying, here it is, anytime, baby, bring it.
Yeah.
But I do want to briefly say that it don't really hold much. Being a cop in the Lower East Side during the 70s, 80s, and 90s had to be very difficult, and there was a lot of pay, and they struggled as well. So I do. But that being said, it was a terrible name and a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's just to put that on there.
Yeah.
But like when we were watching the video that you've got up on Kickstarter. And in that you can sort of see, people are, they're getting down to it, and there's construction happening. People are, putting frameworks up and obviously trying to clean these places up and make them, livable again. Because we obviously don't know so much about that side of it. What was kind of what was the mindset at the time, and kind of how long did people take, and was there some kind of organization amongst the people into getting this stuff done?
Yes, there was. That's one of the more interesting aspects, is that organization. They called it work parties or work duties, or, but each the so-called squats would organize to the best of their abilities. These were still people who had to work and live. And so another full-time job would be taking care of these dilapidated buildings. And so they would form work parties, and they would get together, and they would spend as much time as they could with whatever skills that they had or could be quickly taught to rebuild these places, essentially. Yeah. And the amount of rebuilding varied greatly, not only to the there was different personalities for each of the homes, of the buildings, and so you would have some where there was a lot of drug addiction that was being dealt with, a lot of youthful people, or a lot of inexperienced. There were some that They were largely immigrant populations,
Yeah.
South American and Central America. And so they frequently didn't have as much time on their hands. They worked a lot harder, or were more occupied with just making a living.
Yeah.
And so it varied greatly. But the stories of it are not only fascinating, but sometimes hilarious. There was one 544 East 13th Street where they had to basically free a suspended elevator. The building had been so derelict that, but the elevator was still in. So these two guys get together and say, you know what? This thing has been literally hanging over our heads. Let's go up to the roof and cut it loose.
Yeah, just
and
get
so just drop this 3-ton bomb into their basement basically, and luckily the building survived. But it's quite a story.
So in all this sort of old footage you've got, how much of it is there roughly? Have you got a handle on like sort of how many hours of...
On Kleeman's footage? I've got maybe 3 to 4 hours of good life in the squats, personal stuff, and the celebrations that they had, which were many and awesome. And then a great deal of the stuff. He lived right across the street from the 5 that were sieged, and for many reasons his place was not. Mostly because it was situated between a church and a former grocery store, and so it was the 6 across that held the most value to the city. But so he shot out I would say probably an hour and a half, so more than a good enough amount. And then there's also archival footage shot by the police themselves that I have. There's archive, and then news footage, and so all told, I've got a great deal of just fascinating look into the battle itself.
With you say about the police footage, was that something that was that hard to get hold of, or were the police kind of
almost impossible? Yeah. And again, it might genuinely be lost by the NYPD. The archival process that it was not digitized until almost a decade later. And so they are just VHS tapes.
Okay.
And so I was very fortunate enough. I met another man who suffered greatly under the NYPD on 5th Street through a Access TV show that they had done, which was a big thing here in New York for a very long time in the 80s and 90s. Was the cable companies had to give away broadband. Okay. So
like sort of they'd give away broadcast time for people to do sort of whatever they needed to do, or
whatever they wanted. And Manhattan was very it was extremely varied. It was very funny. So through Paper Tiger TV, I saw the credits of the people who had suffered on 5th Street, and met Kurt Reinertsen through LinkedIn, oddly enough, through one of my many searches. And he said, go to NYU library, and there's a box of my old tapes. And he had a copy of the NYPD footage.
Oh, wow.
And so I was able to use that and gain access to that. And so it's fascinating. They, I guess they had only recently, so it's not very good. Because they didn't have a whole lot of experience with camera operating, nor a lot of care in probably documenting their own efforts. And so, but I do have it. Yeah, that's how I got it. I tried through Freedom of Information Act to go through the NYPD, but that was too difficult.
It's pretty difficult. And just like the way that you talk about the documentary in relation to the police is, I get the sense that you're not wanting to sort of point too many fingers or try and kind of sort of blast them, is what I'm trying to say.
No, probably not the man on the street. Probably not.
That's what I mean.
However, I'm perfectly willing to blast the higher ups.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But I get the impression that you're not just sort of firing into the dark, which is kind of something, an important point to make, I think, for people. But is there a place in the documentary for sort of their perspective, or have you tried to get interviews from any police or people that were police at that time or anything like that?
More police from that time, and that has been arguably more difficult. There has been challenges getting interviews from the squatters, because the squatters are very, very sensitive to exploitation, and as we all are, I guess. But the NYPD more so. There's been cases where people have, cops and firefighters have testified, and then later been subject to the possible loss of benefits because they're stepping out of bounds. So because this is all turned into court cases and so forth, and people were arrested, then it becomes a more sensitive subject.
Yeah,
I have reached out. I haven't gotten a whole lot of responses. I have not spent a lot of time on that effort. Probably more just interesting to me is the history of power.
Yeah.
And so I'm more interested in looking at the way the administrations dictated power downward, more so than the boots on the streets, so to speak, and how they reacted to the squatters, because people just act the way people do, I think, a lot of times. And there's certainly a culture that was in the process of shifting at the time in the NYPD to a more enlightened viewpoint, but at the time it was terrible, and you could see that. I'm sorry if I'm going on too long.
No, it's fine. I mean, this is more what it's about. I mean, this is what we're really interested in exactly what you've got to say. So this is pretty much.
The listeners don't care about us. They care about
them, so. they get to listen to us drone on for hours on the different podcasts. So
that's awesome.
This is exactly the sort of thing that we're happy to hear.
So the squatters seem to have a kind of real sense of community. They're kind of helping each other out to build up things, etc. A kind of socialist kind of movement, it felt like from the footage. Do you think Giuliani is mentioned in the video on Kickstarter? Was there kind of conflict in politics between the kind of like the people, the squatters, and the administration, or was it purely a kind of financial thing where Giuliani wanted the housing so that Manhattan could become richer?
Well, those are both. Either way, the answer is yes, but they're both answers. Both answers are it's political, right?
Yeah.
So the powers that be, which were against the squatters, and particularly neighborhoods like the Lower East Side, existed for 80 years or more. There was just a long history of trying to gain access to the real estate that had been made in the Lower East Side, which was formerly marshland, right? So it was just reedy marshland hunting grounds for an Indian tribe and et cetera. And it was built up after the docks went away and et cetera. It was built into a real estate. And then people realized you have Wall Street here, you have the Upper East Side, the richest place on the planet for the better part of 2 centuries. And between them is this residential area housed and occupied by people who don't have money. Yeah. And so, hey, what happens if we do this? And so, yes, Giuliani had financial interest in mind for sure, because real estate and finance are the 2 biggest industries in New York and have been for many a year. But certainly he was the Republican mayor for 2 terms and had a political bent and had a vested interest in handing over these properties to people that had given to him and those within that industry. So without question, a political and a financial interest.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, like, for us coming from Britain's not a very federalized country, but you guys are probably the most in the world. Would there have been any influence on him from Washington, or would it have just been a pure Giuliani policy?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There was back and forth a great deal because he was a U.S. Attorney General, right? And so he certainly gained access to federal, and the militarization of the NYPD was a federal program. And so certainly ideologically, I don't know about anything greater than that. There was no National Guard called in. So, and I don't know who else in his administration came from, especially with housing, what came from the federal government. And I don't actually know if I'm answering your question quite properly, but I don't know. I haven't seen evidence of that particular connection, but it doesn't mean that it didn't exist beyond the ideology.
I was going to say there's certain times when you can ask a question, and it literally comes down to you're trying to second guess what someone's motives were at the time, and you can't answer all the questions all the time.
That's right.
The thing I was going to ask just before we come away from this particular point is Graham was mentioning then about the the sort of the community, like a sort of a very socialist attitude, and from my experience I used to work in a bar with a lot of American soldiers would come in, and my experience was that socialism wasn't a very welcome word. It was looked at with some suspicion. It was almost a step away from communism, and And I just wondered if that was something that factored into it as well.
You know, that's fraught with history. Socialism and communism are almost singularly intertwined. We use particularly in American media, it's driven home that they're very similar.
Yeah.
There's some insight into that changing. In New York, it was actually, particularly in the Lower East Side, there was a long history of socialism and communism, and people were openly communist, and there was communist newspapers and socialist newspapers, and so it was much more accepted.
Yeah.
But the conflict was easy to rouse, and so when it became a conflict in '95, the New York other newspapers outside of the New York Times, who probably just failed to mention, just left that argument aside, jumped on the fact that they were socialist and communist, and really hammered it home, and to this day that exists. You can see it on Gawker and other websites whenever this subject comes up. These guys don't deserve what they built.
Yeah, it's
very deep seated. It's very deep seated. It's extremely deep. You can't get people to discuss anything socialist or communist in America without really having to hammer against that ideology.
Yeah, I think it's a real sort of taboo. I noticed that almost instantly whenever I talk about different things.
Yeah, in New York you can get away with it for sure. Yeah. In New York we talk about it all the time.
You see it in Woody Allen films a lot. The gentrification of Manhattan, would you say is almost complete? And in Brooklyn, it seems to be happening in Brooklyn quite a lot as well. You live in Queens.
That's right.
Has Queens started to become gentrified the way that Manhattan and Brooklyn has, or Queens has not been gentrified to the extent that Manhattan and Brooklyn. And the Brooklyn thing is the most recent phenomenon, and it's amazing to watch. People, and I'll just give as brief a history as I can.
Yeah.
The most recent history has been that people are showing up with cash for $1 million apartments. Whoa. And nobody can compete with that.
Yeah.
These are not grand apartments. These are 1, 2, maybe 3 bedroom apartments. Some of them are houses, but even deep old Brooklyn, Red Hook and Windsor Terrace, places that are not convenient to Manhattan, and people are sweeping in and just saying, "We'll buy it sight unseen. Here's $1 million cash. Thank you. We'll see you later." That is amazing. And it was in the Times. It was a well written, well documented piece. Queens, it hasn't happened so much. So much of the coastline, so to speak, on the East River that faces Manhattan has seen some of it. But because we have such an old, I guess it's the history of the immigrants in New York living in Queens is so strong that it's not so well gentrified as it is well lived. And so that makes it a unique place. It is the most diverse place on the planet, and so far has managed to stay so.
Yeah,
that's what worries me about this, because Manhattan is one of my favorite places in the world, and I think that what I love about it is just going to be lost with this kind of a continued gentrification. Artists can't afford to live there anymore, and filmmakers
and Graham, what you love about it, that it is kind of this deep affection that people have for what they believe to be New York City, and it's not to get too emphatic, not to put too fine a point on it, but it's gone. Like that doesn't exist, and it's funny. The only the only places that exists in Manhattan are the squats that remain, through the deal they made through this fight.
Yeah,
and anywhere else it's just not there. That New York is gone. Manhattan is gone.
Yeah. What is the legacy of it now? I mean, what remains of these places in sort of the current day?
I would say, I frequently use this word gem, because when I discovered the footage and the story, I was like, here's this uncovered gem. And so that's what remains in the Lower East Side, are these gems that got grandfathered in. I don't even want to say grandfathered, because they fought so hard for what they have. But they're there. There's a place called Serenity House, and they have a theater in the basement, and it's teachers and artists that live there. And C Squat is, the most notable. and probably the most famous of them. But people still live, and they have that freedom when they're not burdened by $2,000-$3,000 rents to pursue these efforts. So that made New York so lively for so long. And so there's only those gems, those pockets that exist, and they exist elsewhere for sure in Manhattan through legal means, and illegal means. But it's disappearing, and so you have to refer to them as something like gems.
Yeah, it's I think it's that whole phrase of like a gem in the what's the word? I'm looking for the phrase and it's gone now.
Uncovered gem.
Yeah, there's a very English sounding one. It completely escapes me now. Never mind.
Diamond in the rough.
Diamond. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. It wasn't a gem at all. There was another one as well.
Yeah, sorry.
But the other thing that we were noticing as well, just sort of coming back to the film project itself, is we noticed that you got the false prophets playing over the video you've got up there on Kickstarter, and it's sort of it gives it this kind of it's sort of you would not even have to look at the images to you instantly kind of get that feel for a struggle that there's that kind of that punk
us versus them.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It's real punk. That's such great music. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish, but
no, it's cool. No, I was just saying, is that something that's also going to thread through the film as well? And that's
absolutely as much as I can keep it seated in that past that was created at the time. Part of the fundraising effort is to get the rights to a graphic novel that was written at that time by someone who still lives in the neighborhood and who was deeply involved with some of the squats, Umbrella House in particular. And so anything that I can do to keep my hands off of it, in effect, the Kickstarter video necessarily relies on interview, but I'd like to escape that as much as possible. Those memories are important, but they are just memories, and they do change over time. And so if I can pull stuff from that past and to reveal that diamond in the rough as it existed then, that's going to be extremely important to keep it up. And so Steve Wishney and who was in the False Prophet he's so generous. And Alternative Tentacles, which Jello Biafra company has been extremely gracious in letting me use that.
So they're sort of they're allowing that to happen without
yes. It's just for the Kickstarter, so anything else going forward. But they've been extremely generous and extremely gracious, and I really appreciated it. But my motive is to keep it firmly planted in its place and time.
Yeah.
Is that kind of music the way that you identify in New York at that time? Is that kind of synonymous in your mind, punk music and New York at that time?
Yeah, I would say the music and the movement have often gone together, and they still do. There's still bands coming out of C Squat, and that are still going to this day. Mm-hmm. For me, it would be I think those two stories are and the music are deeply intertwined, and it is a protest music in many ways. So.
Yeah. I think it's the same in Britain as well. Often, I mean, you probably know. There was a lot of sort of civil unrest in Britain during the 80s, early 90s as well, and that is exactly the same.
Some of that fed into what happened in the Lower East Side. There was, there was David Adams and others from Britain were deeply involved in the origination of Lower East Side squatting.
It's quite nice to know in a way as well that the kind of the migration of people moving around and being politically active and stuff in different parts of the world.
Escaped Margaret Thatcher and got
Giuliani. That's right. and ran smack into Reagan.
That's a classic case about the frying pan into the fire.
I know what I'll do. I'll leave Thatcher. Hey, look, it's Ronnie.
So, how long have you been working on this for now?
Oh, don't make me cry. I've been working on it. It'll be 5 years in January.
Okay.
And largely that was due to the financial collapse that was the result of real estate.
Ironically.
I was recently married, had my first kid, and was deeply attached to commercial production in New York. And so when it started to fail, I had to dig in and really reinvest my focus on my business, which was a lighting and grip rental business. But I was always working. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the Tumblr site, but there's I basically rented a small storage unit and converted it illegally, I might add, to an office where I could do research and writing on the project, and did that for years. And so it did take a lot, but it also, because it's a historical document, it has taken a lot of research. There's so much to this when told from a historical perspective that it's been time consuming, and I have been working on it for almost 5 years now, but also I would say nonstop. So. And didn't want to raise funds until I was ready.
The thing with the common thread that we see now, we interviewed another filmmaker a couple of days ago, and one of the things we noticed is, I think with like a feature film, there's it's a very different animal. And then when you've got a documentary that you're making about something you actually care about, when you're not making it from a completely objective point of view. There's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of yourself invested in it. And I was just wanted to say, like, do you find that it has drained some of you, or do you find it fulfilling? I mean, how does it affect you sort of in an emotional way?
The emotional process of making a documentary film about a historic and important subject like this is it's extremely hard, is what it is.
Yeah.
I frequently have to dig deep into the research, into the story, to be remotivated. But I still maintain that the forgottenness of it is so important that I just want to make sure that everybody knows the importance of a neighborhood and the importance of a community. And particularly a word like community gets tossed around so often now that it gets lost. But neighborhood is that space and time that you have with the people around you. And it can't, like Graham said, is Manhattan disappearing because he loves it? And the answer is yes, but you look at what happened. It's no longer the neighborhoods that were. It's now Manhattan. Yeah. And so it used to just be called New York, and New York had all these neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods are largely gone. People called the Lower East Side East Village or Tribeca because these things were named by real estate agents, and then they disappeared because they were given away to the highest bidder. And so if I have to reinvest, it's as simple as that, is that I look into the commodified sense of space and I'm remotivated. And so it's thrilling, but it is, particularly as a married man, a father of two, and the owner of a business. Wow does it take reinvestment sometimes. And I sometimes want to slap the makers of DSLRs who wanted to say, hey, look, we can all make our own movie. I'm like, no, you can't.
No, you can't. No,
you can't. You have to invite people on board, and you have to be willing to reach out. And as a first-time feature filmmaker, that is probably the most difficult.
There's in the Meatpackers District of New York, you used to have basically factories packing meat.
As the name would suggest.
Nowadays you have like Robert De Niro living next to Jay-Z, etc. Do you have any kind of resentment towards that? I mean, do you feel kind of...
I did, Graham. I did have a lot of resentment. I used to live in Chelsea. I lived in Hell's Kitchen. And friends of mine had offices in the Meatpacking District. And so me and my friends were largely driven out of Manhattan. It's where we lived, and it's where we had fun, and where we were friends. And so I used to. And then I talked to, and I hope this doesn't go on too long, but I talked to a man named Clayton Patterson. Clayton Patterson was the documentarian who captured the police brutality at Tompkins Square. He was on the talk shows, and he was the first to profess the importance of everybody grabbing a camera and taping these things. And so everything from Ferguson on down can be really pinpointed back to Clayton Patterson, who's written some fascinating books. But he was a Lower East Side fixture who recently packed up and moved to Belgium. And I did an interview with him, and he's not an easy guy to interview. He's very pointed about being exploited, and so wants to say what he has to say. But he sent me on a journey of investigating global money and I don't want to get too conspiratorial because it's really not conspiratorial. It is the access of money to Manhattan that allowed all of this to change. And so that also helped me to kind of take a new viewpoint of what happened. People call it gentrification, and everybody gets upset about gentrification, and rightfully so, because the consequences of gentrification are so dire. But to blame everybody for gentrification, I think, is a little misguided, because it was the fact that money became free to those who could get it, whether through debt, which is what happened in the last crisis here in 2008, 2009, or through just global, where it's now become a global thing. And so the rich do get richer, but they get it richer because the even richer give them that money at almost free. And so, which starts with the government on down for sure. But those who have money, those who are walking in with $1 million cash to pay for an apartment, they got that money, but they got it so cheap. And it comes from that global influx of cash to one location, and it just spreads out. And so gentrification is the result, more or less, and not necessarily the cause. You can kind of look at the etymology of the word, and it is the gentry that that came in with their horses and carriages, and so that's what happens. But I don't necessarily get as mad as I used to before I realized that it's somebody I can't see and can't reach and can't point a finger at. It's not JC or even Robert De Niro, who are just they're hard workers. They're not people I care for necessarily, but it's somebody gave them free money and lots of it. And the result is the death of these neighborhoods and thereby the death of New York City and what we held dear about it. So
but you don't hold them accountable.
I don't know that you can. If what would happen to me if I was given all that free money? You know what I mean?
That's what I was just thinking the same thing. I was just thinking if someone gave me a bunch of free cash, I'd be over the moon.
Free cash, you didn't know what to do with it, Andy. Like I just don't know. I can't buy anymore. Well, there's a neighborhood. I might as well try.
I would probably buy a flat in the Meatpackers District.
It's going to double its value. More free money is coming your way if you can afford it.
Yeah. So with the film then, and the sort of the production side of the film, I mean, I assume that you've had to kind of pull a small team together in a way, I guess.
It was parcel that was piecemeal for sure. I had to bring in a few people to help me here and there, but because my time is so limited, I really had to do so much of it myself, and that was a big constraint on the time.
Yeah, no, I was sort of thinking about the idea of getting a team together, and I just wondered, like if that posed unique challenges, but you sort of answered that in that anyway. I mean, a lot of the time you end up, if you've got time constraints and someone's trying to do you a favor, then you're kind of on their timeline, and so oftentimes you have to just let those things go, I think.
That's exactly what happened. It happened over and over again. I had some very valuable help, particularly with editing. From Peter Vaughn, who's on Twitter and a Columbia professor in post-production, who was a neighbor here in Sunnyside. And I'll just swing right into this because that's where I've gotten the most help is from my neighbors in my neighborhood of Sunnyside and Woodside. And so that's been a real, even on the Kickstarter itself, I can trace it back to, mostly to social neighborhoods, i.e. Facebook, but in particular, it is my neighbors here in Queens that have really reached out and helped me the most.
That feels quite fitting, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of
that.
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask was on your website, you're down as being the author. What would you define your role as being? Like, would you say you're the director of the film? Or
no, I don't. I've really shied away. I kept trying to come up with different words because particularly as making a documentary and a historical one that involves so many people, it's like I've called myself spearheader. I've called myself muckrack. Like what am I doing? I'm like gathering. I'm like disseminating. I think editing is the most important thing, but I'm not an editor.
Maybe a curator.
That would be a good one. Yeah. But then it's confusing, isn't it?
Like, it is. Yeah.
Then I'm not creating necessarily a museum. It's one piece. It's one story.
Yeah.
So I'm taking this. Yeah, it's very difficult. I don't care for any of it, and sometimes like I just want to leave my name off of it. I don't. Yeah, I don't know what to do about it. I struggle with that one for sure.
So,
And also because and I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
But if you choose curator, it doesn't like then there's like, am I pretentious now?
Yeah, no, these words that make me feel like I'm more important.
But then it becomes, well, because I work in film production and like director, like you see that the best directors are really just the hardworking guys. Mm-hmm. Like maybe you just call yourself director and say, look, it's just a job and it's just a job title.
Yeah.
So and just live with it.
So what exactly is left to do on the film?
The more important, I guess, the most important thing is trying to get the rights to the story, get him what I believe is due to him, the author of the graphic novel, Seth Tabachman, and that I think lends it such a nice piece of authenticity. The important thing to me is that I don't interfere as much as I can, stay out of it, and so. I've oftentimes wanted to kind of mimic what was happening in some of the video and film creation of the time without, again, being too pretentious about it, but to look at the access television and some of the filmmakers then were doing kind of this mix and match version of filmmaking and storytelling. And so I've oftentimes thought, well, it would be nice to have all these aspects put together in a strong narrative, or as strong as narrative as I can muster. And yet have so many of those pieces come together. And so to get, I've got a lot of pieces to answer your question, Graham. To get that piece, I think, is important. And then anything I get above and beyond would be used to start putting it together. And so get a few more interviews of some people who come forth through the Kickstarter program, because that's where I've spent a lot of time getting the word out, and it's been very fruitful. And then to start making it. And so it is a modest amount. I had somebody point out, it's like, it's really not a lot of money. I'm like, well, it's not, and it is.
But it's enough.
Yeah, it's enough. Exactly.
Yeah.
What about, like, you spent so many years working as a gaffer, as you said. What did you learn from that experience that's kind of helped you out on this documentary?
I've learned two things that I think have really helped me out. One is that, well, lighting is very important. And I have to say that, it's probably self-promoting, but please rent some lights for your shoots.
Yeah. You can do that if you want. You can
hire somebody to operate them. And secondly is that it's a job. And so often, I think as DIY or independent filmmakers, we get a little caught up in the art of it and how we want to turn things into art. It's not that I don't think that that's important, but the best gaffers, the best camera operators, and the best directors that I've met and worked with have been those who work hard. And so to de-glamorize everything about it and to say, I'm a freelancer, I'm a storyteller, I'm going to turn this into a job. It's self-assigned and it's difficult, but I'm going to do a good job and just I'm going to brush off everything that surrounds it, whether it's narcissism or ego or, I'm an artiste. I'm just going to, because I don't like it. And so I just have to get rid of it and just say, here's my job. This is what I'm going to do. And that's what I've learned, from being a gaffer and watching people bust their butts.
Yeah, it's. I think there's that whole thing as well. Like, it's always a weird situation when you find yourself. We were talking before the interview about how do we want to approach like your history and things like that. And I think what's scary to a lot of people is the film industry seems to be this like huge kind of glamorous industry with it's all these famous people and stuff like that. And I think what people forget is that it's an industry full of people who, like you just said then, who have a job to do like anybody else. And I've worked not in film as a career, but I've worked on a couple of films, and it's a really hard job.
So hard.
It's repetitive. It's very mundane sometimes. Depending if you're working on certain scenes and people, you're getting numerous takes and you're watching literally the same thing over and over again. And the conditions are terrible. The coffee's bad. And you're doing like really long shift. It's super.
I've been bringing my own coffee to film shoots for 15 years.
Yeah, it's just not. It's one of those things where sometimes it can be really fun, but most of the time it's not what I think. It's just not what people think it is,
Mm-hmm.
But
and what it is it's making trying to make a beautiful molehill out of a mountain.
Yeah,
and I think that's the hardest part, and it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, it does. But I wanted to ask them. I don't know. I don't particularly want to push you into an area of questioning that you're not perhaps comfortable with. But with your history in film, what was it that got you involved in film at the very beginning, like sort of back when you decided that's what you wanted to do and work in the film industry? What was it that made you take that step?
That's a pretty easy question to answer. As I think so much of us in the 20th century and 21st century, we grew up as film lovers, and I was a writer. I went to school to be a copywriter, to write, and it didn't work out. I didn't like it. They got me through school, and that was a benefit. Ended up coming to New York, ostensibly to be a copywriter, but then quickly returned to bartending and was continuing to pay the bills.
It just seems like that. I think because I've done the same thing as well. I always, it seems like if everything goes wrong, it's bartending.
Right. Well, it was and so I started bartending and was writing and was doing okay, and it was 9/11 actually that kind of turned things around, because bartending kind of crashed. I was doing some higher end restaurant work, because the hours were much more reasonable. I didn't get home at 6 a.m. And so working in restaurants, they suffered a great deal after 9/11. Something like 6,000 restaurants closed, both mom and pop and bigger. And so I lost about 70 to 80% of my income over that next year and a half, and had to make a change and really didn't know what to do. And took a college at Brooklyn College because I could afford it.
Yeah.
And my first few weeks there was an ad on the bulletin board. They were looking for production assistants for a film that was being made. And so I said, "Oh yeah, let me try it out." And I went in with my older guy attitude. I wasn't the young student that I guess they were expecting. And I showed up on set, and I saw some guys hanging lights in the kitchen at the restaurant they were shooting at. And I said, "I'm going to go hang out with them." And they're like, "Well, we need you to resupply crafty and bring waters to people." I'm like, "No, I'm here for free. I'm going to go hang." And by day 3, I was the last man standing because, as your experience can no doubt attest, that like the days were long and hard, and I was the one who stuck with it. The DP, Valentina Caniglia, was an up and comer, but had a good name in the city. That led me to other gaffers, and it just went thusly. It was, and making films was part of that a little bit. I only took those 2 film classes at that community college, Brooklyn College, but it was pretty helpful. And it really wasn't until I met Rick outside of that diner that I said, "I'm going to put this thing together, man." Yeah,
I want to take the. I want to actually push something in a direction I want to go.
Yeah, and I'm by no means saying that I'm the right man for the job. I'm just saying that's just the way it was.
Well, that's just humility. I mean, that's like it's a great thing to have.
Let's just take this and do what we can, and that's it.
When it comes to your own like personal taste in film, what do you like to watch? Are you a documentary fan?
I am a documentary fan. I wouldn't, I've always liked the outsider stuff a little bit more than your average person. I don't enjoy, just flat out don't enjoy the bigger stuff, and don't go to it, and haven't since I was a kid. But I've found some documentaries to be revelatory, including some. The Paradise Lost trilogy in particular, about some boys who were seemingly falsely accused of murdering some kids, and their affinity for heavy metal music and was target. They were targeted in the media and were thus afterwards convicted, seemingly erroneously. It's that and Hoop Dreams and these ideas of a kind of a protest in movies against ideas, and I just loved rich ideas, and so I found those in documentaries. And but I'm a long time, like everybody, I think, a long time movie fan, but studied movies and really love them.
As a fellow Scot, I have to ask, you worked with Gordon Ramsay on Kitchen
Oh
Nightmares?
yes, I did. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, why is he saying a fellow Scot? Where's he going with this?
I don't know.
Well, like, you don't need to answer this if you don't want to, but what was the experience of working with Gordon Ramsay like?
That guy is sharp. That
Yeah.
guy is so smart. And I can remember standing outside of this failing Irish pub on Long Island, and he just goes. Like, he shows up. We've been, I in particular that day I was like, I think by myself relighting was the revisits in that case. And I got to like stand right next to him because there just wasn't that many people on that particular shoot. But shows up, bingo, let's go, roll camera. Okay, let's do another. And you see people like that sometimes in this business. And you're just, okay, well, that's why he's famous, because he doesn't have to stop and rest, and he doesn't have to mull over, should I be a director? Should I be a curator? Should I call myself an artist? Should I be a writer and a drunk? I'm going to start talking, and you're going to start recording, and we're going to do it multiple times until we got it, and then I'm leaving.
Yeah, that's it, done.
Yeah.
So, like, the Gordon Ramsay character is Gordon Ramsay, basically?
As far as I know, he was very friendly. Like, there's a lot more joking and familiarity around. But man, gosh, dog it is, he's sharp. The guys, and I'm sure I'm not ruining anything by telling you that reality TV has its many staged moments.
You're joking. Oh, come on, you've killed it for me now.
But in particular, Gordon Ramsay knew how to quell any conversation about those. Like, the family of the owners of this bar kept wanting to revisit this episode in the kitchen where this cook, who was a plant, kept drop something on the floor and then put it back in the fryer and serve it, right? And so that's not real. Yeah. And the family is sitting around in this interview, and they're trying to like make these jokes about this thing, but Gordon would just twist them and turn them, and he was like, and I'm like, you could use every one of those things that Gordon just said on the show without revealing anything.
Yeah.
And he knows it. I'm like, holy cow, is he smart?
Yeah, he could have been a politician, I think.
Yeah, please. Don't need more. I'd rather have more reality TV shows than
more politicians. So then, I think we should probably circle back around to the Kickstarter, and just kind of, I guess, kind of give you the opportunity to kind of, say what would you say to people if you had the chance to actually say mouth the words to people looking at the Kickstarter page. What is it that you want them to come away from it with, and like why should they give, or why should they pledge to you? Just to sort of have your time to say what you want to say to people, really.
Yeah, if I had anything to say to anybody watching or taking the time to look at the Kickstarter page, would be, please save me. They say, it's often said that running a Kickstarter is like having a full-time job. And what I failed to realize as a freelancer is how much a pain in the butt having a full-time job is. Yeah. Because I've never had one. And so the idea of sitting down and just grinding out to get a few dollars and a little bit of some views and some participation has been unbelievably difficult. So I'm asking for people to just take away some of my unbelievable office job burden that I'm like a babe in the woods here. Yeah. I've was a bartender and been a gaffer and a business owner, but I've never had a full-time job, and so clocking in and clocking out and trying to get this thing going is unbelievable, and so my heart goes out to everybody who has a full-time job, but I'm asking for a little bit of their paycheck, even if it's just $10.
It's for a good cause, though. It's for. I think it's for. We've pretty much outlined where it's going. Yeah. But I think you're right on that. We have had some very big ups and downs with our show. In exactly that respect, you can have as many listeners or as many views to something, but it seems as though no one's actually willing to reach out and actually communicate with you. And you think, how come so many people be going through our site and listening to the podcast, but not ever say anything to us? It's so frustrating.
I've only given to maybe 5 Kickstarter campaigns, and if it was easier and faster, I think people would do it. It is time consuming. I don't have time. Like, and I know, like, that one of the reasons I put up the images of my storage space that I made into an office was because I'm like, if I understand that giving money is a time consuming drag. But please consider the fact that I sat in this ice cold thing for years trying to research this subject. Think about that for just a moment, won't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, I do understand. Like, you can actually be involved. You can actually listen to podcasts, but when it comes time to give money, I'm like, it's kind of hard to make.
Yeah,
time.
people go, well, I've already had the product, so I don't think I want to. I don't think I want to
It could be
pay
a million. Yeah, there's a million reasons not to give, and only one reason to give, and that's because you have the time.
Yeah.
Because it's not much money. I mean, it's really the time, I think. So. It's not that I don't appreciate the money; I need the money, but the time is the essence. Really, it's the one thing that always stops us from giving. Is we just don't have that much time.
You probably hear this quite a lot, but like, especially when you're getting interviewed about these types of things. But it's something that I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing. Like, I'm interested.
Thanks, man.
I'm interested in New York. I'm a socialist. And I really enjoy that kind of music, so it's something that I really hope.
Well, it's that, and also now, I mean, the thing is, the biggest thing is now, I think once, you've put this all into a much bigger context, and as soon as you get that context and you start to understand the finer points of it, what happened and why, and then you're already drawn. It's already like, oh, now you want to know more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, fingers crossed, people that will hear or will sort of, we just hope that doing this interview with us will actually benefit. People will maybe come along and sort of be a bit more willing because they've heard a bit more maybe, and they want to give that over. But that's certainly the effect it's had on me, at least, because I'm quite excited about it as well now.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I'll tell you, going back to your question about being motivated, it really has been like, I think this is going to be a hoot. Like, I think this story is going to be, I don't know, there was an old BBC show called Connections.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to like...
I don't think I remember it. I was just...
There's a history show that took something that exists today and would trace it all the way back in a kind of a linear fashion, which is difficult in this case, but would say it all started here, on this desert in Egypt when this man discovered that, pressing this thing would turn it into a piece of glass or something. And then we get back to, and here's the latest iPad. And so he draws a straight line. But it was a great show, and it really inspired me in a way of telling history. And like that I think is like, if we can just see how we got here in this story, what like this thing plays such a nice it's such a nice piece of that puzzle, whether it's your love of music, your love of history, your love of radical activism and socialism. It's all going to be like satisfied. You're going to love this, I promise.
Yeah.
If I could just maintain that, I think we'll be good.
I think it's going to be good as well.
Thank you.
I'm like I said again, we just really want to say thanks for taking the time to sort of come in and speak to us.
And to you, thank you for your time.
It's really been like a really great story, a really great insight, and
if you're ever looking for like a house guest from Europe, just let us know, man.
Yeah, but I think we'll keep an eye on the on the Kickstarter as well, and we'll be sort of kind of following that and probably sort of maybe
give you some Twitter support.
Yeah, give some Twitter support and things like that. But yeah, really, it'd be great. Once you're at the next phase or things pick up, it'd be great if we could maybe talk again and see where things are at a later date and kind of build on maybe our own little story about you making another story.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah. I really appreciate your time, guys.
No, thank you very much. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.